In the last lesson, we talked about what it meant to be a pair of congruent polygons, and in this lesson, we're going to focus strictly on congruent triangles, and more importantly, how we can show that two triangles are congruent. So if we don't have all of the information about the two triangles, all we know is some of the information, we can still show that they're congruent. And there's 4 theorems that we can use, and they're all right here. The first one being side, side, side. So if we only know about the 3 pairs of sides in the two triangles, we can still show they're congruent if all of the pairs of corresponding sides are congruent. And then we don't need to know anything about their angles. We can say that they're congruent. Similarly, if we know about 2 pairs of corresponding sides being congruent, and we know that the angles between them are congruent. So it's important that these angles are between. So 2 pairs of corresponding sides are congruent, and then the angles in between those sides are congruent to each other. We can say that triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. If we have 2 pairs of angles that we know are congruent, and then we have another pair of sides congruent that are not between the angles, we can say they're congruent by angle, angle, side. And last, if we have 2 pairs of angles congruent and the sides between, we can say they're congruent by angle, side, angle. So this is a perfect example of a time when you should have either paused and got this information, or you should have listened to me and then pause and then go back and write this information down, because these are 4 very important theorems. We need to be able to apply them, and you need to know what each of them means. So I'm going to do a few practice with you, and then I'll give you a couple to try on your own, and then of course we'll spend some time on it in class. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get down all the information I have. So I want to write down the pairs of corresponding angles and the pairs of corresponding sides that I do have. So here I have 1 mark on segment AB, and I have 1 mark on segment RS. That means those 2 segments are congruent. I have 2 marks on AC and 2 marks on RT, so those 2 sides are congruent. And what the 2 marks mean is that AC and RT are congruent, but those 2 sides are not congruent to the other ones that are marked up. And lastly, I have angle A congruent to angle R because they each have an arc in there showing they're congruent. So I have 2 sides and I have 1 pair of angles, so there's only one option, side, angle, side, and we need to make sure that we've satisfied side, angle, side. Angle A and angle R, the 2 congruent angles, are between the 2 congruent pairs of sides. So they're being formed actually by the 2 pairs of congruent sides. So this is definitely side, angle, side. We can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle RST by side, angle, side, and it's totally okay to just say SAS. So I'm gonna go through this one with you as well, because there's a little bit of a tiny detail here that I want to point out. So I'm going to go ahead and write down the information I do have. I have that angle DBC, that's this angle right here that's labeled. From way back at the beginning of the year, it's important that I don't just call it angle B, because I don't know which angle I'm talking about. Am I talking about the big one, or this little one, or this little one? So this angle here that I went over in blue is named by DBC. It's congruent to angle BDA. that guy. Those two angles are congruent because they have two arcs. Again, that means they're congruent to each other, but not the ones that I wrote in blue. So angle BDC is congruent to angle ABD. So I have two pairs of angles congruent, so there's a couple options here. I could either be looking at angle, angle, side, or I can be looking at angle, side, angle, and I need to figure out which side's congruent. And in these two triangles, I have segment BD in both of them. So if this segment is in both triangles, then it's the same size in both triangles. So I can say that this segment is congruent to itself. And we have a name for that. It's called the reflexive property. So you should get this down here. It's very important. And the reflexive property just says that anything is congruent to itself. So any side is congruent to itself. And since segment BD is in both triangles, it's congruent to itself. So it is a corresponding pair of congruent sides. Segment BD is in between my pairs of angles. So these two triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle. So there's a lot of information in this problem. Please write down any questions you might have, anywhere you might have gotten stuck, and make sure to ask that in class. Whether it's naming the angles, or the reflexive property, or why is it angle, side, angle, and not angle, angle, side, make sure you ask that question. I'm going to write down what I know in this picture. I know that angle B is congruent to angle E. I know that segment AC is congruent to segment CD. Now I have an angle and I have a side, so there's a lot of options here, either angle, angle, side, angle, or side, angle, side. So another little detail, I have here a pair of vertical angles. And vertical angles are always congruent. They'll always be congruent. If they're vertical angles, they're congruent. And we don't need to have them labeled in the picture as congruent. We know they're congruent because they're vertical angles. So I can say that angle ACB is congruent to angle ECD. So I have two angles and a pair of sides congruent. So I either have angle, angle, side, or angle, side, angle. So I need to look at the sides. These two sides that are congruent are not the sides that are between the pairs of angles that are congruent. So therefore, I know these two triangles are congruent by angle, angle, side. So again, angle, side, angle, and angle, angle, side is a very subtle difference between the two. If you have a question about why I said angle, angle, side for this one and not angle, side, angle, make sure you write that down right now, and then you ask me in class when you have a chance. So go ahead, pause here, give this one a shot, figure out which theorem shows these two triangles are congruent, and also write down the corresponding pairs of angles and sides. So looking at the pictures, I have three pairs of sides that are marked up, three pairs of sides that are congruent to each other. So the one mark shows me that those two sides are congruent to each other. The two marks tell me ST and BC are congruent. And the three marks show me AC and RT are congruent. So I have three pairs of congruent sides. The only option I have to say that these two triangles are congruent is by side, side, side. So I have 2 for you to try. Please write down any questions you have from this lesson. There was a lot of information, a lot of details. Make sure that if you got stuck or something didn't really click for you, that you ask me in class. Write those questions down now so you don't forget them, and really try these 2 problems. Even if you get them wrong, try them. Make sure you pick a theorem for each of these and have that written down in your notes so you get credit and you can see if you're right or wrong.